I think it was George Washington said something like, bigotry, we owe no sanctions, and people who have been persecuted, we owe no assistance. All that we expect is for people to demean themselves and to be good citizens.
Whoa.
Yeah, that's where we started from.
Whoa.
And we have other principles to say we're all created equal. We have
And
other
is that where the word humility came from?
This is where we start from.
What? Hey, welcome to this episode of Black Beat Podcast, where we take an unapologetic approach to the topics and issues that affect blacks and BIPOC communities. But before we get started, I want y'all to just mash that button, that like button, to subscribe down below. I'm your host, John Washington, the CEO of Flossin Media. Today, I'm joined by my co-host, Amber Ontiveros, a founder of Ontiveros and Associates, the author of Heal the Four Woundings, a resilient coaching program. Hey, Amber, I'm glad to have you back on the show today, sis. What's happening?
Hey, good to be here. So everyone, we are really lucky. Today we're diving into a really cool, very fascinating conversation about the rising rates of bias incidents and hate crimes in Oregon. People of color, we are on the rise. Individuals, minority groups are up to 21.3% of our population, and we still face discrimination and hate-based violence. We have a really neat guest here today to talk about this.
True that.
The Department of Justice has launched a You Belong campaign, a comprehensive outreach effort to raise awareness around bias.
With a hotline, and the number is 1-844-924-2427. And I'm excited. We're here to hear. I'm going to turn it over to John, who is going to introduce you.
No. Sure, that'll be my pleasure to introduce the sister. Today, boy, and she comes with in a package that none of y'all go even, y'all can't even fathom it. But hopefully by the end of this session today, y'all gonna know who we got sitting here. Fay Stetz-Waters, the Director of Civil Rights and Social Justice at the Oregon DOJ. Now, y'all heard me, DOJ, the Department of Justice, to talk about the campaigns and statewide efforts to support victims of bias incidents and hate crimes. Faye, welcome. This is something else, girl. We're glad to have you here, sister. And just sort of before we get started, don't mind me. I sort of shorten these names a little bit, but Faye's a judge also, so I'm gonna be respectful and call her judge today. Or could I just call you Faye today?
You could just call me Faye today, John.
Then let's get it on, Faye. Welcome to the show today.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Amber. I'm happy to be here. I'm so excited to talk about our work.
Tell us a little bit about yourself, Faye. How'd you come to this vast wonderland that we got out here in Oregon, the place to be, today? But how'd you wind up getting here? So tell us a little bit about your journey.
I moved to the Pacific Northwest for law and love.
Law and love.
Law
Is there such
and
a
love.
Thing? I ain't
Yes.
never heard of it that way, but okay.
Law and love.
Come on with it.
My wife of 25 years is from Oregon. We met back on the East Coast in Massachusetts, where I was living in Connecticut. She was finishing up school in Massachusetts. We met one night the old-fashioned way in a bar. And so, here
Sounds
we are
like
25 years
romance.
later.
Ooh,
It's true.
25 years later?
That's it.
Y'all had that hookup for that long?
For sure.
Man, congratulations.
Thank you
I
so
am
much.
with you.
That's
100.
wonderful.
Sound like a dedicated person.
Yes.
So, tell me about the pathway to arrive to the judge and,
Yeah.
what was it? Where you come from?
I'm from Baltimore, Baltimore, Maryland, and in my senior year in high school, my dad died, and he was my rock. He was the stable force in my family. We grew up with, my mom had untreated mental health issues, and so it was really unstable. So when he was gone, I just couldn't see myself staying in that community without the support that I needed. So I did what many 17-year-olds did, signed up for the Marine Corps. I didn't know any better, but it was a great decision for me and my country. I learned discipline, which I rely on every day. After the Marine Corps, I kind of got used to a paramilitary type structure, order, and so law enforcement seemed like a good fit, but I didn't want to be a police officer. So I signed up to be a 911 dispatcher for a long period of time.
Wow.
And I saw a lot of injustice on the job. I saw the police officers get, will be overtaken by bias, by being, exposed to the same kinds of conditions, not having authority to make decisions that were humane, but being forced to follow policy. And so it was in this kind of background that I said, God, I don't have enough skills to combat what's happening before me. I need to get more education, more training. There was a limit to what I could do, so I decided to go back to school. And I started community college, worked my way up to Trinity College, and it's like, okay, I need to do something else. My police chief said, what are you going to do with a BA in history? I said, oh, good point. He's like, have you ever thought about law school? You're always questioning policies. And he was the first person who put that idea in my head. I'd never seen myself as a lawyer. I didn't know any lawyers growing up, that kind of thing. Then I met my wife, 25 years ago. I said, I'm sick of Connecticut, sick of the cold weather. Let's go to the Pacific Northwest.
That Connecticut do get kind of cold up there.
Oh, my goodness, the snow. And I still had to go to work because I worked in the police department. There was no, you coming in, we'll come get you. So I came out here, went to law school at Lewis & Clark in the night program, and I clerked at DOJ during the day. And that's when I first got exposed to that organization. I really liked it. I liked the structure. And then I took and passed the bar. I ended up leaving Portland and living in Albany. My wife got a job down there. She's an only child, aging parents, so we moved down there to be closer to them. And I got a job at Legal Aid. So I was helping rural Oregonians, poor, had an elder law program, and really, seeing poverty as an adult was different than seeing poverty as a kid.
Yeah.
And it really had an impact on me. And then budgets happened, and last one hired, first one let go. So I transitioned to kind of a neutral decision maker, like a judge. I worked as an administrative law judge for about 8 years, and then worked as an equity associate at Oregon State University. I worked in parole board. There was this kind of due process, is which I was interested in. All of these jobs that I had. My wife teases me because she says, "Oh, you just job jump." I'm like, I'm looking for a fit, and I'm interested in this, looking at what is the level of process that individuals get when they are in interfacing with systems. And so that was really the unifying idea. A vacancy came open in the county where I lived, and Governor Brown appointed me to that position.
Good old Brown, right on.
And then I didn't win my election, but after that, I had a lot of job opportunities, and I, had this opportunity to go back to the Department of Justice as the Civil Rights Director in the AG's office. So that's where I am. That's where I've been since 2019. Right before I came in, there was some legislation that was being proposed.
Wow.
And that ends up being my work.
Tired of high gas prices? Save money on your transportation costs with TriMet's Reduced Fare Transit Card. If you meet income requirements, you can get your first month free while you enjoy unlimited rides on buses and trains anywhere TriMet goes. That's 1 month free, a $28 value when you sign up today for TriMet's Reduced Fare Card. We'll help you travel smarter and make your money go further no matter what the price is at the pump. Visit TriMet.org/save to learn more and apply today. That's TriMet.org/save. TriMet. How life moves.
I'm here to tell the listeners, I wouldn't want her to be determined about chasing me or getting after me, because if y'all heard her story a little bit, she came from the bottom and crawled through the rubble to get to where she is right now. And that was your story makes me envision a tenacious individual, from where you come from, the way you came through the weeds and through the rubble, and look at you now. You're at the top of the hill on the mountain, sister. But Faye, I am so impressed. But tell us a little bit about this program you got in tow over there at the DOJ. You Belong. This campaign, what's that all about?
Yeah, You Belong is a brainchild of the Civil Rights Unit. It's a new unit, it's a small unit. It's a part of our crime victims division. And the You Belong campaign is an awareness campaign to bring support to Oregonians who've been impacted by hate and bias based on their protected class. And this awareness campaign is to support them and bring awareness to the bias response hotline that we have, and the resources that we provide on that hotline. This hotline is the only kind of hotline of its kind in the country.
Wow. Amber, what you thinking about that part of this, man? This is...
Yeah, it's really interesting. So, Faye, for the listeners that don't don't know a lot about me. So I used to be an investigator for the U.S. Department of Transportation, and I'm familiar with the U.S. Department of Justice's investigative techniques, specifically around investigation of cases of discrimination, like by DOJ, by the police department, by any agency that gets federal money. So it's interesting that there's been a surge in reports. What are some of the techniques that this team is utilizing for the public? And then the other thing I'm really interested in, John and I are, we've created an executive coaching program to create resiliency, in which case, you know, isn't part of the problem really within the agencies?
Well, I definitely think we have, work to do throughout our organizations. And this campaign is trying to provide a resource for folks to report hate, bias, discrimination, things that are happening to them in the community based on other people's perceptions of who they are. And we've not previously had a place to document this type of stuff.
Yeah.
And so this hotline becomes a very rich source of data for us to be able to use, human-centered approach with data-driven approach to propose to our communities, to our lawmakers, real information about how do we make effective change. We need it. People are experiencing great harms and, being targeted, being harassed, feeling unsafe, having to pick up and leave, move. We've had people leave the state because they were harassed by a neighbor. We've had people, they'd rather live in their car to go back to a place that was unsafe, where someone was just targeting them and calling them all kinds of names, destroying their property, and these kinds of things. This is a lot of this is criminal behavior. A lot of it is non-criminal behavior. We previously didn't have a mechanism to address the non-criminal behavior. Police don't investigate non-criminal behavior. They investigate crimes. But we also know that the bias incident, which is what we're talking about, which is generally non-criminal behavior, can become a precursor to bias crimes. And so this information, it sits in a place where people can see it. It's all publicly available on a data dashboard. You can go and click on your community and see how many people have reported to us. I think it's important to note we are not the only place where people can report. You can report crimes to law enforcement. You can report crimes to other community-based organizations. We're just one place.
So I just want to say this to Faye. We've known each other in a previous issue that where I had experienced what I felt was some policy issues by my client, who, in my opinion, didn't properly interpret the constitutional law of the underlying policy. And so I met with Faye and some of the attorneys, and I just want the listeners to know this, that the fact that they are doing this and that there will be quantitative data by which you can analyze, I'm assuming by protected class, and this other piece of information, which is, so when we sat down with my client and their attorneys, the Department of Justice attorneys, to interpret this one policy, it turns out that my client was the one that was hiding behind the law, and the DOJ attorneys were actually interpreting the law correctly. And so I just really want to encourage all the listeners that then go and use this tool to and see incidents of bias in particular locations. I would encourage you to use that data, as well as, Faye and the Department of Justice as advocates, because they're really trying to stretch in terms of how they interpret the constitutional law to support us.
Wow. And Faye, tell me, are these numbers real? I mean, the Bias Response Hotline has registered a 25% surge in reports from 2022 to 23, and a staggering 229% increase since the inception in 2020. What are some of the key trends you've observed from the data collected through the hotline, and what do these trends reveal about the state of bias and hate crimes in Oregon?
Thanks for the question, John. It's yes, the numbers are real. These numbers reflect what's been reported to our hotline, not necessarily all that has occurred.
Gotcha.
Again, not everybody knows about the hotline. Not everyone feels comfortable contacting a state agency to confidentially report something awful that's happened to them that was meant to demean and degrade, right?
Yeah.
And then year after year, we noticed these numbers were increasing reports. And as our diverse communities grow, we felt it was a civil rights unit's obligation not only to lead this work, to create this campaign to bring awareness to these populations that this hotline exists and that we have resources to make people aware of these resources. So we felt this was our work. That's why we're raising up now. We have seen this growth since the inception of the hotline. I answered the hotline when we first started. You drawn on my 911 background, right? We had one person allocated to the whole state.
Wow.
Yeah. And I was able to hire our bias response coordinator in March of 2020. You know what was happening in March of 2020, right? We put out a public service announcement in January 2020 to announce the hotline, but it was just overwhelmed by all of the other news that year. When we look at trends, we started collecting, when the bias against the anti-Asian Pacific Islander bias was occurring around COVID-19, we started collecting those reports. So that was the first trend. We saw a huge uptick in the types of reports were coming into the hotline. And then throughout that year, 2020, with the killing of George Floyd, with the social justice protests, with the election, with January 6th, and it kept going. Then 2021 came, and there was something else. It was been wave and wave after wave. And so when we have known if something happens halfway around the world or right next door, it has an impact right here in Oregon, and it's felt through people who are then experienced are targeted for bias and then contact our hotline. So we have some rich data.
Faye, do we got any juicy kind of like things that were like any kind of specific like categories or things that pop out at you right about now from this data that you got here?
We have, anytime there's protest, there's lots of folks who call in who are impacted. Certainly, what's happening on our college campuses around this,
that's a hell of a topic going on right about
around the country.
Yeah.
Certainly, we will provide services to anybody impacted by hate or bias. And we really want a safe and inclusive campus for everybody. We promote peace, we promote safety, we promote inclusion, and so we want those things. Those are things we advocate for as a society, and we condemn any violence, bias, or discrimination. And we are open to people calling. We try to stay impartial. It's a service for everybody who's impacted by hate or bias. So we are impartial, we are inclusive, and we are confidential. So people can go and make a report to find if they need to.
So you when I was the vice president of the NAACP, they had an ombudsman.
That's right.
That's sort of similar where you get these complaints, they would come in, and then you go out and you investigate these complaints. Do you guys do the investigation part of these complaints too, or you just gather the data?
We gather the data. It's just that when the Senate Bill 577, which is the nomenclature that the legislature used when this bill was first proposed, that we still affectionately called, but behind the scenes, Senate Bill 577, which is our hate crimes or bias crimes and bias incident law, did not give us investigatory authority. They were talking about how do we. And this comes, the background for this hotline comes from, the killing of Larnell Bruce Jr. in 2016.
Right.
Comes from the killing on the MAX trains and our Attorney General going out and listening to bias crime and bias incident victims directly from them to find out what was missing. And they said, look, our complaints weren't being taken seriously. They weren't being investigated. Nobody was telling us how to stay safe. They said it's a free speech problem. There's nothing they could do. And so it's listening to victims tell us the story that became the foundation for the task force that then made the recommendations to change the law.
Wow. Come on, girl, with your bad self. We, the community outreach and education, this is always a topic, because that's what made me come into media. Media has always been so cryptic for certain demographics that sometimes it shoots over the top of our head. It don't really hit us. But my thought is that, you go to meet the people. You create medias and platforms that meet the people.
Mm-hmm.
What type of engagement is the DOJ doing to ensure that communities that are most affected by these bias incidents and hate crimes are aware of hotlines and outreach and the type of supports that they do? What's the DOJ doing about that?
Thank you, John. In addition to us doing outreach in the community, we do tabling events. We were just at the Rise Above Hate program. We have a campaign, an actual campaign working with early PR and Media Labs and PASA Language Solutions to put together these videos. I don't know if you had a chance to see these videos. They're absolutely beautiful, compelling. If you're not moved, I don't know what you're made of. These are people telling their stories, and we thought it was important that people who experience hate and bias, their voice, their experience be front and center in this campaign. So you will see people representing diverse communities in these videos. These videos will be made in multiple languages: Korean, Arabic, Russian, Tagalog, simplified Chinese, Spanish, and English. We also have 4 billboards that are posted around the state. Those will also be available in multiple languages. They'll be in Portland, Gresham, Beaverton, and Medford. We're going down to Medford and then over to Bend to do trainings with FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office to make sure law enforcement knows how to prosecute and DAs know how to investigate and prosecute these types of crimes. So we've been doing that type of training. We have multiple languages, multiple formats, radio, social media. We even engaged a social media influencer, Michelle Van Lee, who did a video talking about her experience.
Hey, from the rooter to the tutor, my boy. You got that all covered.
Yeah, we're trying to lock it down. And an online Spanish language program, launched online, DOJ's website. So,
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, and Faye, I'd be really interested to hear, does the DOJ have any other legal or policy frameworks to protect Oregonians? So the only other state that I know of is the state of California that has a state law that allows citizens to bring a private right of action under a state law for basically kind of like Title VI discrimination. In other words, for the listeners, if a public agency, the way they administer their work, results in discrimination based on a protected class, in the state of California, you can sue and bring a private lawsuit against the public agency. But there's no such law that exists in any other state except for California. What are the kind of policy frameworks or any legal implications would DOJ consider, especially given that you're now collecting this data? It's the perfect opportunity to see whether there is a trend upwards, in which case then it's a perfect segue into bringing a policy proposal to policymakers.
Right. I think thank you for that question, Amber. We have robust civil remedies within our bias crime statute. And so this summer, I am working with National Crime Victims Law Institute on creating a Know Your Rights application for limited representation for folks to be able to put your question in to see if you're experiencing a bias crime, if what options do you have as a crime victim?
There you go. Because that's what I was sitting over here thinking.
Yeah.
So
Crime victims have a lot of rights
around some of this stuff.
The crime victims have a lot of rights, and we're trying to make sure that those rights are represented, respected in the court, in the criminal justice process.
Perfect.
And we are training lawyers to be able to take those cases along with National Crime Victims Law Institute. Not DOJ, but we are working with NCBLI on a pro bono basis right now for folks to have this limited representation, and if they want to continue on with that attorney to explore other legal options, civil legal options, then they are eligible to do so. So that's a program we expect to launch later on. Well, NCBLI expects to launch later on this summer, late August, early September, to help our civil because we have attorneys who want to help.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
We want to help. What can we do? We don't know how to do this stuff, so we're working on a training program with NCBLI to help lift up the knowledge set to be able to bring these cases.
Yeah, that's dope, because once that happens, then because it's the monetary lever that is always the impetus to change policies. So that's dope.
Yeah, thank you.
I mean, but y'all, we staying in safe land right about now. But y'all know where we live, right? We live in Oregon, one of the whitest places in the country. And so, the adversary, I guess I can frame it as an adversary, that the people who have other agendas, and have perception and that they overreach. Let me hit you with this one. Some critics argue that by addressing grievance specifics to subgroups, racial, gender, and others, campaigns like You Belong might inadvertently deepen the division of, or contribute to a culture or hypersensitivities. And how do you respond to those who feel these measures are taking things a bit too far?
Well,
then what is too far? I mean, when you're a slave, what is too far, right?
What is too far? I mean, we have a baseline of where we've come from in this country, in this state. And I think, it was George Washington said something like, bigotry, we owe no sanctions, and people who have been persecuted, we owe no assistance. All that we expect is for people to demean themselves and to be good citizens.
Whoa.
Yeah, that's where we started from.
Whoa.
And we have other principles to say we're all created equal. We have other
principles. Is that where the word humility came from?
I mean, this is where we start from.
Wow.
And so, we also have words on the paper that say we're created equal. We have rights to say, we can't discriminate. So we have to stand by the words that we say. And when people act in ways that you can think and believe whatever you want. We're not touching your thoughts. We're not touching beliefs. It's when you act, and you act in such a way that you commit a crime, you hurt someone, you hurt their property, you transgress the law, that you'll be held accountable. And that's a standard we should apply across the board, not just we didn't mean it like that. When it comes to certain kinds of people, we'll never make inroads. We'll never create a place where people feel welcomed and safe and complete. And Oregon needs as many people feeling welcomed and safe and complete and contributing as possible.
Tired of high gas prices? Save money on your transportation costs with TriMet's reduced fare transit card. If you meet income requirements, you can get your first month free while you enjoy unlimited rides on buses and trains anywhere TriMet goes. That's 1 month free, a $28 value when you sign up today for TriMet's reduced fare card. We'll help you travel smarter and make your money go further no matter what the price is at the pump. Visit TriMet.org/save to learn more and apply today. That's TriMet.org/save. TriMet. How life moves.
Ooh, Amber, this judge is hitting hard. I mean, y'all better look here. I don't know if y'all listening to this. My listeners got to be out here listening. But this is some deep stuff. I mean, when you consider from where we came from and to where we are right now, I mean, and then to look at and listen to the people who are in the DOJ, and they serious about this business, about these policies. But let's talk a little bit about the policy and legal framework, right? Senate Bill 577 defined biased crimes and incidents in Oregon and laid the groundwork for the hotline. What other policy measures or legal framework that Oregon DOJ is working on to ensure better protection and marginalization and vulnerability for Oregonians?
Thanks for that. It is a starting point. And I think, given the allocation that we initially received, one person to do statewide work, and we've grown since then. Wow. We've gone back to the legislature year after year with the narratives, kind of explaining what are the hardships that people who have experienced hate and bias, to no fault of their own, what are the hardships they've experienced, and we bring those forward. This is how last year we were able to make effective this year that our bias crime victims now are able to vacate a premises terminate a lease, a residential lease, without a financial penalty. That cost was getting foisted on to bias crime victims. when they were experiencing bias in their living situation, they had to pick up and move. Those types of consequences were being passed on to the victim. And so we advocated, we explained that to the legislature, and they helped us create protections for landlord-tenant. For safe leave for bias crime victims. We've included bias incident victims in our mental health counseling treatment benefits under the Crime Victims Compensation Program. We've also are in a position to train the district attorneys' victim assistance programs on bias crimes, bias incidents, and our processes. And we're really trying to help take the stories that have been given to us, entrusted to us, and help elevate them to the legislature so that we can implement effective changes to help folks. We're not on the front end. We can't be everywhere because it's just 11 of us statewide doing this work. And we certainly need communities to help us with that work when everybody stands up.
Yeah. Could you give us like a specific example and then like how you handled it, like kind of like the results?
Specific example of
either like a bias call that came in and then how you handled it.
Okay, so I will have to speak in general terms because bias,
the
what's reported to us.
Private.
Yes. I mean, it's a confidential reporting hotline, so we can only speak in generalities. So we have people who, I can talk about this one because it was kind of in the news, but this person during COVID was refused treatment, and he believed he was refused treatment in a restaurant. His family was, it was kind of a large party, and they were seated in different places, and got poor service. And there was some type of substance in his food. He got sick, and he tried to report. He went to the hospital. He tried to report what happened. He thought something happened from the restaurant. He called the police, and the police wouldn't take his report. Oh, that's not a crime. Well, we don't have resources. Well, we were able to go in because we work closely with law enforcement. Hey, this person, this was a situation you said you don't have resources to test this. Mm-hmm. So when this person got online, we've talked about resources, right? We can help you. There are other legal options that you could pursue. So he was advised to kind of keep the material that he collected, get it tested. So we helped him find a place to be able to test it, to come back to find out what the substance was. And then he was able to use that in his legal case down the road. Mm-hmm. So, a poor experience in public that was race-based, that was, targeting people based on the perspective of who these people were and whether they belonged. Then was the person was then, not given appropriate investigation and just shut down. And then it resulted in a lawsuit. Wow. So we didn't bring it, but this person was put in a position where they could get the resources so that they could bring it.
So those are good examples.
Yeah, they were great examples. But I'm just curious as to they don't come out of the gate necessarily with a sort of disposition that is going criminal. Does this bias framework look at from a criminal thing or a civil standpoint of view?
So when a person, we have a assessment that we do behind the scenes. A person's calling us and telling us what happened. We're being trauma informed. We're not interrupting them. We're letting them tell the story as much as they can, as much or as little as they can. However, a period of time, if they can't all do it in one call, they can call back. We have 240 languages, interpreters available, so people of all kinds of languages can connect with us. Our advocates are multilingual, and so we're gathering information. And then we have basically a checklist. We use an assessment tool created by the Vera Institute, which is a victim-centered bias assessment tool. It's made for law enforcement and concerned communities. So we use that. So we're looking for impacts. How is a victim impacted by what happened to them? What did they lose? What does that amount to from their perspective? And so that we're getting this kind of information, what we never got before. That often, sometimes doesn't. If the case doesn't go criminal, then you don't ever see, a victim impact statement. You don't ever see. So we're making an assessment that the behavior that was described to us, is it a biased crime? Does it involve one of the 7 protected classes: race, color, religion, disability, gender identity, sexual orientation, national origin, disability? Is it one of those? If not, then it doesn't come under the statute. Our houseless population, if they don't fit in under those other categories, as one of those categories that fall outside of the statute.
Right.
So then we make an assessment. Did you see the person? Did the person hit you? Did they destroy your property? Did they leave a racist name? Okay, on your property, that sort of thing. So, okay, this fits the definition of a crime. So then we'll label on this in our data that this is a biased crime. We'll determine whether it's a misdemeanor or a felony. And it goes, if you look on our data dashboard, it describes all of those. If it's not, it is a bias incident. So 60% of what's reported to us is a bias incident. That's non-criminal conduct.
Got you. So the staff that answer these phones, I'm always curious because I'm a clinician in my mental health background, so it's always important to have someone that can navigate these troubled, disturbing waters. And so do your staff people who handle these hotlines, are they trauma-informed trained? And what are their backgrounds like? I mean, what do these people answer this phone like?
Thanks for the question. We're very lucky and fortunate to have just a devoted staff who are multilingual, who come from an advocacy background. We were able to, kind of pull people from DA's offices, district attorney's offices who are already doing the work, but we have a different lens, and we also were able to pull successfully or recruit successfully. I won't say pull, recruit successfully from people from the nonprofit world. So we have people who have background in Lutheran community services. We have people who have that type of background who work in the community to help us. So we bring people from cross sector to come together, and we meet once a week to kind of talk just as people, because we all work remotely. We've only been together like once, all of us.
Wow.
Yeah.
So are y'all pushing to improve on that surface, or do y'all want to have that team camaraderie kind of thing going
we
on?
do. Yeah, we have what we call non-time, which is time to just talk about who we are and what we're doing. We do that a Friday morning for half an hour.
So do you have a demographic, like, for example, let's look at combating underreported and building trust, right? So what's that like, Judge? I mean, when you consider the fact that a lot of people don't understand the complexities of these types of complicated issues, how are you engaging in sort of building trust in that kind of reality and getting people to come to these hotlines and call?
Sure. I think keeping our information confidential is key. We were able to kind of tweak the law, ask the legislature to tweak the law to protect our data. We had been getting public records requests from outside the state, people looking for information to then harm people, dox people. That is taking people's private information and publishing it online with the intent to shut them down and intimidate them. So, we are looking at how do we, bring folks together? How do we build trust? And it starts from being trauma informed. It's having the languages represented, asking whether you need an accommodation, asking if there's anything you need before we proceed. And then we want you to make an informed decision. We're trying to help folks make informed decisions about the next steps. We know some people may not ever want to report this to law enforcement for all that means. So we advise folks, look, we got to, by being transparent, look, this is what we can do. We can't investigate or hold the perpetrator accountable in any way. We can't initiate a lawsuit. If you have an attorney, we can't interfere with that attorney-client relationship. We have to get permission before we proceed. If you make any statements about abusing a vulnerable person, that can't be kept confidential. And then finally, we are subject to public records disclosures, and we are collecting data with your permission. You can say no, and we'll still help you. So if a person is willing to consent to those 4 things, then we'll go ahead and take and listen to what they have to say. Listen with patience and empathy, and often we're the first organization or person to tell them what happened to you was wrong. Speaking in their own language, providing community-based resources. So
Faye, I'd be really interested. So you said that 60% of the cases are bias incidents and not criminal. Of those 60%, have you noticed any patterns of practice in like a particular industry? I mean, because the example that you gave was a private sector example. And so I'm assuming that this collects all data.
It does.
In which case, it isn't just private sector.
That's right.
It's public agencies.
That's right.
In which case, Anyways, so I'll shut up. Go ahead.
We have a category. Well, like during 2020, we started collecting everything. It's like we didn't know what was for. When someone's calling your hotline, you have an opportunity. You don't hang up when people say, "Oh no, we don't do that." Now, this is a person in crisis who wants to share something that happened to them. So we have a category for public agency, a government agency, or some type of public agency that somebody did something wrong, somebody discriminated against a person, somebody refused somebody treatment or treated somebody disparagingly. We have a category for that, and you can search by that.
Wow.
How often that has happened, to whom it has happened, the demographic, and what happened.
This is really, to some degree, it sounds complex, but it is also a reprieve. Because do you know how often, even us amongst ourselves, the black people amongst them, we experience some things amongst, and then you have nowhere to you have nowhere to go to voice what you just experienced, and a lot of times what your experience is never so overt. It's something you walk away with feeling dirty about, but then after you process with it, you feel all that shame and guilt and all that stuff, and then you show up and you go, well, what do I do with this? And I, to be honest with you, I find myself in that situation a lot, considering the fact that but you're a man, you should be strong, you should weather the septic, go home, choose God, blah blah blah, all these things, instead of going, well, where do I take this? And I'm glad there's a place now to figure out where you take it at, because so let's think about inclusive communities. What advice would you give to local organizations and businesses and individuals to help foster safer and more inclusive communities where everyone feels like they belong? And is that a real reality of a world, or is that something we envision as a world? But I mean, considering the realization of what the origin of all this shit and where we come from over the last 400 years, is that real? Is it real to be able to possibly get there?
I'm a hopeful, optimistic. I like to aim high. I like to see the best and the most, and I also like to be real. I have experienced the pain, being called racist names, being called homophobic names. It doesn't feel good. And in the shame that people are left with, that carry around, that's not fair. It's not what we stand for. I do think businesses, communities can be open, positive, welcoming. Signage matters. Signage in people's languages. Lots of languages matter. I want us to just, wrap Portland around with a big rainbow, to say we are welcoming and inclusive, especially in light of all of the retractions of liberties and rights that people have had, and that people are moving here because, the state stands for progress. The state is, attempting to be inclusive in its laws. And, I think its leadership reflects that and can reflect it more. Wow. I think people getting involved, people showing up, people supporting each other and standing up against hate is huge. This is why we chose billboards, because they're very public and very visible, and hopefully they won't get tagged. We put "You Belong," period, intentionally, because it's in the story. Nothing else to say.
Well, and so, Judge, could you help us understand the difference between actual hate speech and offensive opinion?
Yeah, I mean, because I had this written down. I was saying, what's the framework if this applies to Trump or something like that? We got out there,
I think, hate speech, really is founded in, it's race, religion. I mean, it's bound in those protected classes. You say something derogatory, demeaning, intentionally to hurt a person. The people who engage in hate speech, mean to hurt you. Offensive speech, sometimes people are just ill-informed, been indicting on the same type of literature, news websites, and haven't peaked up to have a different perspective. It may not necessarily point directly to something as hostile and hateful as hate speech. It can be more clever and more disguised.
Yeah. So when someone like my family grew up in the South, and we knew what the Klan was. I mean, I saw them when I was a kid quite often. And, so when you have these counter-organizing efforts, I mean, like what type of counter-organizing efforts to this kind of an agenda do you experience? Is white supremacy real in relationship to this, or is white supremacy just such a larger thing? But you could actually hone it down. These biases and these things could become even smaller than that bigger picture. I mean, do you focus on the bigger picture? I mean, of this, of how its origin is, or has it become micro now that we're looking at the variety of different cultures that we have in the framework, the types of new kinds of subcultures that come into the space? I mean, what do you? Is there a bigger to a smaller agenda that you're looking at, or is it just as it comes?
It's one person at a time. It's about how do we support human dignity? How do we support and promote safety? And so, I mean, we're getting students, kids in the 3rd grade, getting called racist names, kids not being able to go to school. I mean, I grew up in Baltimore and I didn't know racism until, I was an adult. I didn't grow up with that in school. The idea that our learning environments, this is what it's polluted with. We have rules and regulations. I just think people need help in enforcing the rules and regulations and the civility that should come in those kinds of environments.
Or understanding them. And this is, and as we've been having this conversation, it almost would appear to be a complex thing, but folks, listen, it's really not that complex. They've simplified it for you. Pick up the telephone, get the hotline, and if you feel some experience that you just can't rest knowing that you experienced it and it's something that's eating away, hey, there's a solution. Pick up the telephone. Talk about it. Somebody might be able to share with you rather than not if you got something in your hand or not, or at least they can release you from the bondage. So, but Judge, I mean, this has been really exciting. I can see you over there, Amber. I know you just really wanting to rock and roll with this. But, Judge, I tend to look at these things and I go, okay, we do these interviews, but I'm wondering if there was something with your complex history, and have you navigated some of these difficult waters? You're sitting there, but I know for some reason somewhere there might have been a question that you're saying in your mind that I should have maybe asked you, and maybe perhaps you wanted to share something that we didn't cover. And there's an opportunity for you to do that with our listeners at this point in time. What is it that you're harvesting? I mean, that you have in you right now that you'd like to express?
I want us to have one Oregon, where we can be strong, east side, west side, north, south, west, the coast. We can be strong. There's enough for everybody. We don't need to be afraid. We don't need to be afraid of our fellow human beings. We have so much to give. Individuals have so much to give. It shouldn't take bold courage to stand up and be a decent human being. It shouldn't.
Hear.
But I think it's difficult because we're so worried about what somebody else is going to do or say. And really, when it comes down to it, how many people go home and say, gosh, I should have said something. I wish I had said something in the moment, or I saw something. Don't wait. Just be ready to act. And I want to make a special appeal to our Black, African American, our LGBTQIA2 plus communities, our Jewish Muslim communities, our communities with people with disabilities. This hotline is for you too. This hotline is for you. We want to make it welcoming. We want to make it inclusive. We want you to know you do not have to sit with this alone, that there is support for you, that what happened to you was wrong, and just reach out to us, and then you can move on with your day.
Man, sister, Judge, I am so honored to be here with this discussion with you here today, but definitely informed. I know more now than I did then, and believe you me, I have gone home with questions in my head continuously, and if I wasn't a soldier mentality, I would probably have been crumbled by a few of these things that I experienced. But I am so glad that y'all are driving this bullet home here. You hear? And that y'all got something for people to come to and express and be able to navigate some of these difficult climates that we're having today. But here, I can't help but to ask you, when you apply these lenses to our former president, where we at? Where that?
We have to be resilient, and we have to be resilient despite that. Despite that, I think we had hate speech. We had these kinds of ideas well before he came into the presidency.
I remember Wallace and all them cats.
We have a history, and I think it would do us well to remember our history, to read our history, not erase our history. So,
and Faye, I'm so honored again to have you here. Amber, you got any closing thoughts?
I just want to remind to our listeners, if you or someone you know has experienced a bias incident or hate crime, reach out to the Oregon Bias Response Hotline at 1-844-924-2427 or visit standagainsthate.oregon.gov.
Hey, y'all don't forget to hit that mash that like button to subscribe. And listen here, this has been another exciting episode of Black Beat Podcast, where we bring to light formulas for successful living. They ain't got to be ours. They're out there. Check it out. But anyway, we out, and we appreciate that. You hear, Judge? We appreciate you having it.
Thank you so much for the time, John and
Respect to
Amber.
you also, sister. And keep up the good work, you hear?
Thank you.